Financial argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, just like Greece and just like Cyprus, we see, and many of the other European countries and South American countries, the economies are failing. Now, in Puerto Rico, they are going to be bankrupt come July 1st. And we see the House right now, they're pushing this bill. It overwhelmingly passed in the House. It is now moving to the Senate, where they're going to be voting on this bill. And they're expecting that to pass there too. And it looks like this bill is going to provide a bailout for Puerto Rico. Because if they don't do this, they are completely bankrupt. Now, this is just the start of it. As we know, there's a lot of towns, a lot of cities, a lot of states that are hurting right now. The people of the United States, they're kind of catching on because we see huge consumer confidence. This is falling right now. We also see the Gallup poll, which is a poll of the people. And when you look at this, we see that economic confidence, it has tumbled to 2-year lows. It looks like people are losing faith in the economy right now. And when we look at this, we see that the economic outlook, it is falling very quickly. It's down to negative 22. Current conditions, that is also falling. And what we're seeing right now is the economy is not doing what the U.S. government central bankers are trying to convince the world that it is doing. And it is not doing well. It is doing a lot worse than what they're saying. We're also seeing there's a huge amount of corporate debt. There's about $6.6 trillion why the U.S. is heading for this collapse scenario. Because what we're seeing at this point is that a lot of the big money, a lot of the big names, they're completely shorting the market or getting out of the market or purchasing gold at this point. We see names like Stan Druckenmiller. He is saying the bull market is exhausted. He's moving to gold. We know George Soros. Well, he's shorting the market, looking to get into gold. We see Carl Icahn, same thing, shorting the market, looking to get out of this market that we're seeing right now. We see Sam Zell saying this is the time to get out of real estate. Shouldn't be in real estate. And we know at this point in time that the Bilderberger Group, they're having their meeting in Germany this week. And we know what they're discussing. They're discussing a one world government. They're discussing this economic collapse. How can we control the people? How can we keep the people from using free speech? And one of the things they're talking about is a virtual passport that web users would need to use to obtain internet. And there would be an internet ID. And they would be able to track you. They'd be able to see what you're saying. They'd be able to block you whenever they needed to do so. They're talking about a global tax system, which the UN would control in the very end here. And we can see at this point, their mission at this point is to have a one world government. This is their main goal. And of course, what we're seeing right now is countries, even though they have the central bank intertwined with them, they're fighting against this. We see out in Europe that what is going on there is where they're trying to have this open free border and trying to have the refugees move into these areas. The countries are fighting back and saying, no. We do not want this. We don't want this open free border system. We want to control it. We don't want our sovereignty taken away. But we can see at this point, this is what the one world government is all about, is creating everything to be as one. And we can see at this point, they're going to continue on pushing this goal, but eventually countries will fight back, the people will fight back, and it's going to be a very difficult thing to do. So what they do is they take very small steps. They take very small steps, convincing people, thinking that this is the right thing to do. They did this in Europe, but it is backfiring right now. Out in Germany, we see the German people are saying, okay, we've had enough. Demonstrators, they have formed a human chain near the U.S. Air Base in Western Germany to protest against the lethal drone strikes. And they were blocking everything. We see the U.S. now is deploying more military assets around the world. As we know, we have aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. We know the Harry S. Truman is there. We know that Dwight D. Eisenhower is there. We know out in the Pacific, the John C. Stennis, that strike group, is continuing their operations near the South China Sea. And we know that the Ronald Reagan, that has departed for Japan. And of course, this aircraft carrier strike group was going to join the John C. Stennis, and they're going to keep peace and stability in the region. Well, this is one of the first times in a very long time where we've had the U.S. deploy aircraft carrier strike groups at the same time in two different areas conducting drills at the same time. So we have them in the Mediterranean, and we have it out in the Pacific. Very interesting. We see Iran, Russia, and Syria, they had a meeting back on June 9th, and they have agreed to step up cooperation in the fight against terrorist groups. And any country or any group that sponsors terrorist groups, they will be going after them. Now, we understand that the United States government central bankers, they are building a base, two bases actually, in Syria. We understand that Germany is upgrading a base in Turkey. And then we get word that France is building a military base in Syria. And this is near the city of Kobane. And we see right now that the French Special Operation Forces deployed in North Syria started the construction of the military base. And they are doing the same thing that the U.S. is doing, where they can bring in huge transports, bring in military assets, bring in troops to this area. So what we're seeing right now in Syria is we see the U.S. has special op teams, the U.K. has special op teams, France has special op teams. Most likely there's many other countries already in there with their teams, because we know that the United States, Ashton Carter, went all around to the European countries, to the coalition forces, saying, listen, we need more military assets, we need troops, we need to build this up, we need to create these zones. And with the military bases that the French are building, that the U.S. is building, it looks like they're moving towards this direction. Now, over this weekend, we had a mass shooting, and I wanted to talk about this and the anomalies that we have seen in the shooting. Now, officials announced at 10:15 a.m. in a news conference that the number of dead, that has risen to 50. And what has happened here is that in a club in Orlando called Pulse, Orlando Pulse, an LGBTQ club just south of downtown, there was a man that walked in. It was a hostage situation. A SWAT team was called in, and there was gunfire all over the place. And of course, the shooter ended up dead. So the question is, who is this shooter? His name is Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen. And he was born on November 16th, 1986. He lived in Fort Pierce in St. Louis County, Florida. He is a registered devote. He's a Democrat. And his race is listed as other. Now, what's very interesting about this is that the FBI knew of him and most likely was in contact with him, which we've seen many, many times before in other shootings, which turned out to be complete false flags. Now, Obama was out there giving a speech, and of course he touched upon gun control, but we'll get to that a little bit later. And he wanted the FBI to look into this, most likely to cover a lot of this stuff up. And we see that Omar, he is reportedly pledging his allegiance to the Islamic State. Because NBC reported that before the shooting, he called 911 to pledge allegiance to the Islamic State. Does that make any sense whatsoever? That he's going to place a call, pledge allegiance to the Islamic State, and then go into the club. That seems a little far-fetched there. But this is how propaganda works. And of course, people like to run with this. And then we have the ex-wife come out saying that he was violent, mentally unstable, beat her. And the ex-wife said she met Omar online about 8 years ago, decided to move to Florida and marry him. And she said the marriage felt normal, and then it became abusive. Well, they needed this story in there to show this is why he would go and flip out and shoot people. Now, ISIS, they are claiming responsibility for this shooting, that he was one of the Islamic State fighters. And we see that the Syrian news agency, which has close ties to the Islamic State, says that the group is responsible for the attack on the Orlando gay club, which killed 50 people, left about 53 injured, allegedly, because we don't know the exact facts of what happened there. And there are certain anomalies to this entire story here. First of all, if you do a search on Google, there is a lot of people who reported 2 shooters. And it comes up in the search, but when you click on the stories, those seem to be disappearing very, very quickly. The other thing is, Omar, he was a gun owner. He was a statewide firearms licensed. And very interestingly, the nightclub was a gun-free zone, because in Florida, where you serve alcohol, those areas are gun-free. Now, other strange anomalies is that, first of all, he has pictures on MySpace. Do you ever notice that all of these shooters and all of these type of false flags, they always use MySpace? Most of the time. Well, he took pictures of himself wearing NYPD shirts, which is strange in itself, but then you start to realize that he was in security. He was a notary at one time. Maybe he wanted to go into law enforcement, and the FBI was in some type of contact with him. So when we start to put a lot of these pieces together, he was in security, he was a licensed firearm owner, he liked law enforcement, he liked to show himself wearing an NYPD shirt, even though the NYPD is saying he had nothing to do with, their organization whatsoever. And we're starting to get in the picture that maybe he wanted to go into law enforcement, and most of the guys that are in security would like to take that next step, but many of them can't make it in, or something happens. And maybe the CIA, FBI, or any other agency or governmental group approached him and said, listen, we know that you're into security, we know you're into the agency, into joining law enforcement agency, and this might be your chance. We need you to help out with this drill that we're creating. We're going to have you with your handgun and a shotgun, and we're going to need you to go into the club, and a lot of people are in on it, so don't worry about it. They might have put blanks into his gun, we don't know. And we need you to start shooting. Now, a handgun and the rifle that he had, can he shoot that many people at once? That's very, very difficult. But then we're getting stories about this second shooter. Actually, people on video saying that they've heard multiple shots coming from many different areas, not just one. Now, the father came out very quickly and said that this was not because of religion. And he said the motive for the attack was because he saw 2 men kissing in public in front of his 3-year-old son. Okay, so this is why you would go in and kill everyone, which he has no criminal background. He has no incidents whatsoever of anything like that. And he was in security, maybe looking to get into law enforcement. So this really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. He wasn't on any terror watch lists. And what we're seeing right now is that the establishment, the corporate media, the president, they're talking about terror, that it was an act of terror. This is a domestic terror. Islamic State is out there claiming responsibility. We have NBC saying, yes, he phoned in before he went off on the attack. I haven't seen that much footage inside. A lot of people dancing in there, a lot of people going on. You think a lot of people had phones. You think a lot of people would be taking videos at this point. But the videos that I went to look at, they're being taken down very, very rapidly. So you really can't see that much. And when we look at these steps that we've been looking at, we start to draw a picture that this fits into a false flag. And now, we have to remember, it doesn't mean that people don't die in a false flag. A hoax and a false flag, two different things. But let's go with the story of what the government is telling us, what the corporate media is telling us, and they're telling us that it is the Islamic State, that it is an act of terror, that he was part of ISIS. Well, we have people out there calling for gun control. This is the worst ever, and we know Obama wants to get that legislation pushed through. We know the Dianne Feinstein bill is there. We know his gun legislation bill is there. We know that he supports. We know that many others are in there pending in Congress. And if you notice, every once in a while they need a little push because there's no traction with them whatsoever. Now, of course, they added in a little mix into this where it was done in a gay nightclub, trying to get everyone in the same direction of saying, okay, enough's enough. But if they're going with the story that this was terror, would it not be wise to have everyone armed in the gay club to fight against these terrorists? Now, I'm not saying it was terrorism or wasn't terrorism, but I'm going with what they're trying to tell us. If terrorists are in our country, if terrorists are going to be shooting up people in clubs and movie theaters and different places, shouldn't we all be armed to protect ourselves? Now, if we're going with the other end, that he was just a crazy loon who was out there because he didn't like the gay population and he just wanted to shoot up people, well, shouldn't we not have gun-free zones in these type of establishments? Maybe people need to protect themselves against these people. Now, of course, as we can see, we need more information. But there are a lot of anomalies, a lot of things being taken down very quickly, a lot of people reporting 2 gunmen, and a lot of this, at this point, really makes no sense. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.